Welcome to the Port Huron Statement. This is episode 2 of the Port Huron, North Fox Island, Epstein Nexus series that I'm doing, which at this point I'm trying to showcase the enormity of North Fox Island and all of the different tentacles that spread from it and how they converge and re-emerge in Port Huron and national politics throughout history, and how this pattern, this scheme has been plucking people from St. Clair County for decades and exploiting them in the worst ways, while the county is kept in poverty intentionally to enable this. And there's a massive financial trail that really reveals this, and to understand that, though, you need to kind of understand North Fox Island and how that worked. And so we're going to go into North Fox Island more deeply so that we can connect the North Fox Island strategy and money directly to current power brokers in the United States today, specifically in St. Clair County. All right, so how Francis Shelden outran justice, part 1, I guess you'd say. The fugitive's fortune. So in July 1976, Francis Duffield Shelden gets a phone call. It's from Dyer Grossman, his partner in the CSAM operation that they were part of for 15 years, that was largely trafficking kids from St. Clair County and sexually exploiting them in North Fox Island and Island in Lake Michigan. And building a nationwide infrastructure of charities and clients. This blossomed into a laundering, embezzlement, and blackmail scheme that influences the county and national politics to this day. So Grossman's voice is tense. Gerald Richards, their other major collaborator, is in trouble. He says the police are closing in and he might start talking. Grossman's advice was it would be wise for you to leave until we settle the awaited events. Shelden knew what that meant. They had been collaborating for 15 years running the North Fox Island endeavor, which was a series of shell companies and shell charities, fictitious charities, religious organizations that were in fact concealing and advancing a private pedophilia haven in Lake Michigan in North Fox Island. He thought, Francis Shelden thought of it as his private pirate island, and he viewed children as the objects that he was plundering. North Fox Island on paper was a Christian charity in the form of Brother Paul's Mission and the Church of the New Revelation. It is in fact where he flew boys under the guise of philanthropy and generosity, while it wasn't in fact charitable at all. It was a hunting ground, a personal, twisted form of the most dangerous game. But now with the warning from Grossman and an additional warning from Gerald Richards' wife, Shelden exited the area ahead of law enforcement with enough time to collect his belongings and clean out his primary residence in Ann Arbor. This is because Shelden wasn't just a predator. He was extremely well connected. He was well informed. He had resources. He had a private airplane, and he had a whole nest of shell companies, charities, people, and institutions that were partnered with him and exposed to profound leveraging, whether they just didn't want to be attached to that type of enterprise, or if they were attached to it, they were motivated to assist Shelden in his plea from justice, or at least that's how it shook out. He was a financial architect. He had a plan to protect the fortune no matter what had happened legally to him in the United States. A plan that would take him from Michigan to the Caribbean, a fugitive financial scheme directly mirrored after black operations and other laundering schemes well established within the culture of the intelligence community, power brokers, and the long money that Shelden possessed. The key to that plan was the Reef Club. the Mill Reef Club isn't just a yacht club. It is actually a legally autonomous enclave inside of Antigua. So they aren't necessarily subject to the Antiguan law enforcement apparatus per more or less what is a treaty between the landowners that own the conglomeration of individuals that own the Mill Reef Club. It's a private space in Antigua where the rich and powerful go to hide money, often laundering it through the Mill Reef Fund, which I will include some graphics showcasing how blatant this laundering is. They will describe large checks for excess of $5,000 with very vague descriptors and no auditable means of deciphering if it is an authentic charitable contribution. This is expressly disallowed in like 990 shit. This is a blatant flouting of legally required disclosure for this type of operation. And so the fact that they have for decades utilized vague phrases like medical aid and humanitarian aid to dispense millions of dollars, it's blatant laundering. Anyway, so yeah, this is a place that's utilized to hide money, hide secrets, hide people, hide themselves, obviously, and to stage plans off the American soil and house companies, etc., etc. And in 1976, it was Francis Shelden's sanctuary. So if you follow the FBI manhunt into Shelden, you'll kind of see how he bounces around the country, essentially preparing for his ultimate flight from the United States into Europe. And like a primary stop and the last stop is the Mill Reef Club, where he establishes this trust and relationship to create financial vehicles by which he can liquidate his assets and have access to that wealth from Europe, despite being a fugitive and despite a lot of the money being directly associated with trafficking children. So Shelden didn't just visit the Mill Reef Club, he used it as a base of operations, and this is actually commonplace for that specific site. It's a lot of the motivation why it is a legally autonomous region. According to FBI files and court documents, Shelden traveled to Mill Reef multiple times after leaving Michigan, coordinating with associates, hiding from arrest in the FBI, and setting up the financial infrastructure that would ideally protect and grow his wealth, even if he spent the rest of his life as a fugitive from American justice. The real kicker is, though, that the Mill Reef Club wasn't just Shelden's hideout. It was founded by America's financial and political elite, and is known to feature connections to the CIA, the Mafia, Goldman Sachs, and old American money. It also features a surprising number of families with direct connections to Port Huron's current and past elites. For example, the Ward and Atchison families, names that have held massive influence for decades. This network proves deeply connected to the Mill Reef Fund, a laundering operation that's been moving money to convenience criminal enterprise and black operations in the United States for decades. And again, I'm going to post the examples of the massive transfers of wealth that they have utilized without offering anything close to adequate descriptions or auditable financial pathways justifying that those checks were authentic philanthropic contributions. I mean, they clearly weren't. If they were authentic philanthropic contributions, you would easily include the person you gave the check to, the organization, what it was being used for specifically, not medical aid and humanitarian aid. It's laughable, and it's clearly both embezzlement and laundering. Anyway, so before Shelden fled to the Netherlands in 1976, he didn't run, he retreated to a fortress, and that fortress was built by the financial instruments which enabled him to keep profits directly associated with child sexual exploitation for the simple fact that he is a member of the clique the families, the bloodlines, the people that pull the strings and are able to shelter themselves from justice while building this series of shell companies so that they can keep the profits from that criminal enterprise. I mean, as we go on from here, you'll see that the courts continually grant him an extraordinary amount of privilege, while conscious of the fact that he's fleeing from justice and one of the probably the largest child sex trafficking case ever, even though it only ended up with one arrest. On September 28, 1976, Shelden signed the Francis D. Shelden Revocable Inter Vivos Trust. The trustee of that trust was the Trust Company of the Virgin Islands Limited, a shell entity founded by Adam Starchild, who himself was a convicted fraudster and the man Shelden thought to be a bona fide fixer for the types of problems financially he was facing. The trust was loaded with over $2 million in securities, stocks in Detroit Bank Corporation, JP Morgan, Dow Chemical, Mobil Oil, and more. But the real assets were the shell companies that Shelden had founded and owned in entirety. Wendigo Ranch Incorporated, which was a Colorado corporation holding Shelden's Aspen House, FDS Land Company, a Michigan corporation holding Shelden's Charlevoix property, and North Fox Island Company, holding the island itself, and 100% of the stock in these companies was owned by the trust. So, Shelden didn't just stop there ultimately, though, in this sense of being relevant. He appointed L. Bennett Young, a Michigan lawyer, as the protector of the trust. Young had full authority to remove trustees, appoint successors, and even amend the trust, and Shelden trusted him apparently implicitly because Young was part of this network, part of the Grosse Pointe network that he had been born into. But here's the real scandal. Shelden should have been arrested in 1976. The police had evidence, they had victims, they had photographs, and yet no warrant was issued for days. There were multiple different delays. One of the critical reasons was because Shelden had protection, and that protection came from none other than Carl Richards, the prosecutor in Washtenaw County. This Carl Richards is Gerald Richards' direct relative. He's like an uncle. And so the co-defendant of Shelden's is the prosecutor in Washtenaw County and intentionally delays the issuing of the warrant for days, giving Shelden time to clean out his primary address and flee. And when the police finally raided Shelden's Ann Arbor home, he was long gone, along with all incriminating evidence, so they say. Although, there's another thing, is there's a consistent pattern of not actually searching. They still haven't searched North Fox Island. It's insane. Alright, anyway. But Shelden made one mistake. He trusted Adam Starchild. Starchild himself was a thief. By 1977, Shelden was living in the Netherlands. He was a fugitive from justice, but Starchild was refusing to provide accountings for the trust that he was managing on Shelden's behalf under the Virgin Islands Holding Limited, which was put in place to manage Shelden's trust, which was the Francis D. Shelden Revocable Inter Vivos Trust. He was ignoring Shelden's demands for accountings and other financial statements which were required per the agreement and the Articles of Organization. And then in 1977, he liquidated the trust's assets, a total of $1.7 million in securities alone, and transferred the proceeds into a labyrinth of shell companies under his exclusive control. Here's how it worked. Minerva Investments Limited, out of Hong Kong, liquidated the securities in June 1978. So he moved the securities from the Virgin Islands Holding Limited into Minerva Investments Limited in Hong Kong, and then to Gradison Cash Reserves Incorporated, which was out of Cincinnati, which is where $1.4 million in proceeds end up. Then Eleuthera and Starchild's personal shell company, received the funds from Minerva. So Eleuthera and Stolt is owned entirely as a private holding of Starchild. Then it goes into Sogo Shosha Limited, another Hong Kong entity, which was entirely held by Eleuthera and Stolt, which again is a private holding of Starchild. Then further money is moved into brokerage accounts at Bear Stearns, Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, Shearson, Haydenstone, where the money was hidden under fake names and shell entities. Starchild moved the money through Hong Kong, Florida, New York, and the British Virgin Islands, changing names, jurisdictions, and entities to hide the trail. And when Shelden demanded an accounting, Starchild consistently refused. When Shelden appointed a new trustee, Edward Brongersma, Starchild ignored any directions from Brongersma, and when Shelden sued, Starchild fought back, using bankruptcy filings, default judgments, and outright lies to keep the money for as long as he could. And here's where it gets a little absurd. In 1978, Shelden, who's currently in frickin' the Netherlands and a fugitive on child sexual exploitation, CSC, child porn, all these crazy charges, sues Starchild in federal court in the United States. In 1984, a U.S. Court of Appeals ruled in Shelden's favor, ordering Starchild to return the stolen assets, and we're going to go into that probably more in subsequent episodes. The court finds as follows. Starchild breached his fiduciary duty by failing to account for the trust assets. He wrongfully removed a total of $2.97 million in total assets from the trust. He transferred the assets into his own holdings and shell companies, Sogo Shosha, Minerva, Eleuthera, without Shelden's consent. And he lied to the court, hid records, and refused to comply with orders, because you have to understand this is an appeal hearing as well. So there were three different sort of dockets associated with this. And the kicker, the court didn't just rule against Starchild, it ruled that all the shell companies, Sogo, British American Trust, Minerva Consulting, were holding Shelden's money in constructive trust, meaning they had to give it all back. But here's the real interesting part. Even though Shelden won in court, in reality he loses this battle, because by the time the Sixth Circuit Court ruled in 84, the money had already been moved around. So after the initial judgment, Starchild started to spread the money in every different conceivable direction. So by the time they had ruled against Starchild, the money inside of the trusts that they were ruling against had already been liquidated. And so there would have to be a subsequent lawsuit against the other entities that had received that money in the interim time period between the initial judgment, which was in Starchild's favor, which was essentially just a dismissal, to the subsequent appeal, which found in Shelden's favor, which required the reimbursement through these shell companies. But again, these shell companies and Starchild himself filed for bankruptcy. So essentially what he did is he put it into a shell that couldn't be associated with him, filed for bankruptcy, then when he comes out of bankruptcy, he starts accessing the pool of money. Shelden, still a fugitive, was ultimately unable to effectuate the adequate legislative maneuvers necessary to return the $3 million, although he continues to live in lavish fucking luxury his entire life in the Netherlands. But the real story isn't just about Shelden and Starchild. It's about how this pattern continues to occur, the same use of laundering, the same use of blackmailing connections to avoid consequences, the same use of islands and the use of these special jurisdictions in the Caribbean, which enable the laundering, enables these flights from justice, and enables the coordination between ultra-wealthy individuals, the intelligence community, and, foreign entities, politicians, etc. Place like the Reef Club, with its unique legal situation, it provides a very valuable hub by which criminal enterprise can be planned and critical elements executed with essential impunity, functional impunity. And so that's what this is really about. It's about the same people and the same tactics and the same entities over and over again, exploiting this area and the entire nation, exploiting this area to assist in the exploitation of the entire nation. Mill Reef Club was founded in 1947 by a group of wealthy industrialists and politicians, including the Atchisons, the Sheldons, the Ward family. There was a bunch of industrialist money involved, and it wasn't just a yacht club, it was a financial hub and an intelligence hub, a place where the rich and powerful could hide their money, launder their profits, and evade the law. Sheldon used Mill Reef Club as a base of operations, traveling there multiple times in the period between 76 and 78, courting with Starchild, setting up the trust, hiding assets, and learning what's going on in the United States, getting sort of filled in, getting advice from people, politicians, and members of law enforcement and intelligence community. And the Mill Reef Fund is a financial philanthropic arm of the Mill Reef Club, which is a blatant laundering operation, as I've mentioned before. So when Sheldon fled to the Netherlands, he was fleeing to another sort of protected enclave as well, and we'll go into how the Netherlands has this weird history with the Boy Love movement and pedophilia material. This is the thing. While Sheldon and Starchild are two individuals, they represent something bigger. It's about a system that feeds on places like Port Huron, one that threads through small-town corruption, financial crime, intelligence operations, and ideological warfare, all the way from Main Street to the White House, the Vatican, and the halls of power worldwide. Sheldon's escape wasn't just a local scandal, it was a case study in how the system works. The initial crime, which was child trafficking, blackmail, and financial operations, was followed by a cover-up, delayed warrants, prosecutorial complicity, and judicial cover, and assistance ultimately in returning his fortune. The financial architecture is directly integrated, the offshore trust shell companies and laundering hubs that are effectively enabled to operate criminally with impunity. There is this culture of enabling criminality through shell companies as status quo, even when it's blatant that there's financial crimes going on. I mean, in some of these court hearings, it's just insane. It's like all this money is associated with child sex trafficking to begin with. It should have all been seized. If these people weren't connected, it would have just all been seized. I mean, consider the civil forfeiture that goes on in Port Huron, and they'll take your money for anything. But they let these people keep $3 million that they had profited largely from trafficking children. Anyway, and then the network. This ultimately, interestingly enough, Adam Starchild connects to ABSCAM, the largest congressional bribery scandal in U.S. history. Also to the CIA and the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation, through the Church of the New Revelation, and through several other charities and church affiliations that Sheldon, Starchild, and other members in their clique had. And, of course, the local Port Huron apparatus, which provided most of the children and continues to operate in the same way to this day. The same tactics, the same networks, the same players, sometimes with different names, sometimes with the same. So what can we do? We can follow the money, because the same financial tactics that Sheldon used in 1976 are still being used today. The same system that protected Sheldon is now protecting the depraved copycats that populate Port Huron's power structure, and a large portion of the entire political infrastructure is in some way tainted by the blackmail economy that ultimately evolved from these types of strategies. In the next episode, we'll talk about ABSCAM and something. I think we will go into ABSCAM after this. there's a lot here, and to understand just how troubling and connected these things are is going to take some amount of patience, because you'll start to see as we go through this, it's the same effing strategies of shell companies, shell charities, shell churches that are operating as fronts to exploit people financially and to access their children, which are then in turn used to create compromise, which is then used to blackmail and control politicians and other power brokers. So not only, this strategy ends up being incorporated deeply into the intelligence community. And so Port Huron has effectively been utilized as a compromat farm, a place where they can more or less abduct children to traffic, to perpetuate these same... Okay, so Adam Starchild connects to ABSCAM through Minerva Limited, his one shell company, which was engaged in moving money to obfuscate the transfer of wealth to congressmen in order to advantage a foreign fictitious business person in evading taxes and essentially giving them advantages that are criminal in exchange for money. And so Minerva was one of the financial vehicles by which this transfer of wealth was going to occur. ABSCAM is the biggest corruption scandal that hit Congress. It's 3 sitting congressmen and 1 senator that were accepting bribes to advantage, again, a fictitious Middle Eastern sheik that was requesting preferential treatment and so essentially to obfuscate the law and to pay minimum taxes and other, gain access to domestic incentives and loopholes, etc. Essentially in exchange for money to pose as an American citizen, gain American citizenship, gain access to other vehicles to enrich themselves in exchange for a direct financial contribution to these congressmen. And so that directly connects Minerva and Adam Starchild, and ultimately Francis Duffield Shelden, again, to the world of intrigue and corruption, a massive network of intrigue and corruption. And I guess over the time I'm going to showcase that this isn't just some singular person that was engaged in pedophilia. This is an already established, by the time Frank Shelden became a practitioner of this, it's already established network and scheme for exploiting people and for politically controlling people, because you don't really need to blackmail everyone in politics or everyone with authority or everyone in a population in order to control them very intimately. You just need to be able to blackmail someone in their vicinity and create compelled obedience, make it so they'll do anything to avoid being outed for their engagement in the child sex trafficking rings. But here's the thing, is this power structure is advanced till now. And when you realize in totality the types of tactics these people use to maintain their power, you'll realize that this cannot be allowed to continue.